Terrific. All right. Well,
That wasn't me saying, let's get started. That was me not forgetting to start the recording.
very good. We have our tiny robot has told us that we're being recorded now. We'll get started in just one moment. I'm just scanning through. Do we have a quorum, Alex?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Just
terrific.
to clarify, did you call Alex a tiny robot just now, or did that?
I didn't. I have a nickname for the recording that voice that tells us they're being recorded, that it's like a tiny robot. So that's all I meant. Alex is a full-blooded person who I know very well is not a robot at all.
Well, that's the Turing test, right? It's when if you have to be able to prove yourself that you are a robot, then you might be a robot.
Well put, Dave.
I got to go back and watch Blade Runner again.
I was going to say I can't remember the test name in Blade Runner. Well, I am pleased that this is all being recorded at the very least, Dave. So this is for posterity's sake. Okay. Hello, Anya and Sean, Jenny. Welcome. All right, William. There we go, William. Good. All right. Well, let's get started. Welcome all. To our third Truth and Labeling Task Force meeting. We are very excited to dig in. We have a very full agenda, so we'll be diving in. Although as I am diving in, I'm seeing if our new task force members, who I will be welcoming in a moment, are on the call, and I'm not seeing them. Alex, do you know if they, and I apologize for calling on you, putting you on the spot, but do you know if they have registered and should be here before I welcome someone who's not here?
Representative Evans is signing on right now.
Terrific.
And Maya should be here, maybe just running into some technical difficulties.
It's the technical difficulties, the new traffic in terms of meetings. So, with this task force, I will do our welcome when we join them. We'll introduce everyone and we'll dig in. Oh, somebody is coming off. There you are, Representative Evans. Welcome. Now I'll do my first of the welcomes. Welcome. My name is Dylan DeThomas. I'm with the Recycling Partnership and your chair of the Truth and Labeling Task Force. And I will also welcome Anya Brandon, my vice chair of the task force. And we would love to welcome our newest member, Representative Paul Evans from District 20. He represents the residents living in the communities of Independence, Monmouth, and portions of South and West Salem. Representative Evans, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Would you like to say anything?
Sure. Glad to join. Looking forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we would love to connect with you if you would like to jump on a call, and we can catch up at any time. But we're really happy to have your attention and expertise on the panel. We'll also be welcoming shortly. We also have another new task force member, Maya Bulow, engineering analyst and waste reduction specialist for Lane County, who fills out our task force. So we are finally at full strength and full speed, which I'm very excited to note, because we have a lot in front of us today. So again, welcome to Representative Evans and to Maya, and very happy to dig in. And with that, because I don't think Maya's with us, I still would like to dive in. So can you go to the next slide, please? All right, everyone. Well, I wanted to kick us off today to talk a little bit about the calendar and our work plan, because we, of course, have a product that we need to produce, and we have a roadmap to get there. And so I threw this together, and the first thing I wanted to say is we have the fuel. The fuel is us. We are the full Truth and Labeling Task Force that we are going to drive this home. And we have a fair number of things still to consider as a group, as we've done some research and digging in, and we even had some homework on the last call. We need to consider the scope of what we will cover in this. If we do need to do more research, what research we need to think about. How we think about future labeling, I think, is one of the pieces that we need to dig in on. And then finally come to at least a majority consensus on what recommendations we'll be making. The roadmap for that is going to be either 4 or 5 more task force meetings, because we have a report not to start, but to finish on June 1st, 2022. Alex, could you please go to the next slide? So I threw together, again, we already have this meeting booked, and then of course our meeting following on April 4th. And after that, we really only have time for 3 or 4 more meetings. So a total of 4 to 5 more meetings. And I wanted to walk through when we what we would potentially cover in those meetings, and hope to have some conversation and discussion among the task force members to make sure that we're all aligned as to, you know, if we can prioritize this and that we can make this happen, or at least, again, have a quorum of folks available for each of these meetings. And then obviously I have there the week of May 30, which is a holiday, the delivery of the report on that Tuesday. Go to the next slide. So today, the meeting that we're going to dig into, we're going to talk about the scope. We're going to talk about the challenge, a bit of a review of the what our charge is here on the task force. But also we're going to dig into the proposals that the task force have kind of worked up as to what potential recommendations could come from. And we'll have time for the folks who put together either bullets or a full proposal, as well as some time to answer some questions for all. Then on the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks, we have our 4th meeting. And I have a question here. I actually wanted to propose potentially having a longer meeting, because I believe we're really going to be digging into, you know, exactly what would be potentially in that report, and really dig into considering what the straw person proposals mean, and start putting this together, maybe taking pieces out of one or another to build together what we could ultimately have as a recommendation. Again, currently we have a 2-hour meeting on the books. My suggestion would be to make that 2.5 or 3 hours to be able to make sure that we get it all done. Maybe I'll pause really quick and just see if there's any concerns about potentially any longer meetings, because I believe this should be on everyone's calendar already. The April 4th meeting is.
I would not be able to do a longer meeting on that day. I'm pretty solidly booked.
Thank you,
Unfortunately.
Right.
And Chair, I will be out of town. I'll be in DC, so I will be unavailable for that meeting altogether. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
I could do at least another half hour, Dylan. 3 hours would be tough, but
Well, consider that as we go to the next meetings, the meeting schedule, the roadmap as I see it, and think about this as you're answering your doodle polls. Oh, you can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So following that report outline that I showed on the April 4th meeting, really we want to be pushing to finalizing those recommendations the week of April 18th. So really then beginning work on drafting the report. I will get to a question I have for the entire task force, but my initial consideration is that to have DEQ draft the report, as they are available and have pencils sharpened at the ready to support us. Then the week of May 2nd, we would be looking to complete the draft of that report. And again, this is all moving very quickly, but that's because of that June 1st deadline that we have. Alex, you can go to the next slide. Then we have the week of May 16th, and you'll note that there's no time. Those would be weekly. So we would have the week of May 16th to be able to edit the report, consider it, and then the week following, potentially a shorter meeting to finalize the report, to make sure there are no burrs that need to be sanded down or what have you. And then finally, on June 1st, that Tuesday, to deliver the report. Maybe you can go to the next slide. Again, so this is you know what we're the path that we're going to be going towards as a group, and then you can go to the next slide. because ultimately I really want to underline this, because June 1st, we have to turn this report in. And right now we are just beginning to consider these things. So hopefully we'll be able to have enough time within those meetings, as well as the time in between the meetings, to be able to do the work that is going to be necessary to come up with a strong recommendation to be able to help support the residents of our fine state. So perhaps you can go to the next slide. I have an outline of this, and then I want to call a question about the author of the report. So again, what is our charge? Our task force, the task force shall study and evaluate misleading or confusing claims regarding the recyclability of products made on a product or product packaging. The study must include consideration of issues affecting accessibility for diverse audiences, and the task force shall submit a final report and recommendations for legislation in the manner provided by ORS 192.245 to the interim committees of the Legislative Assembly related to the environment no later than June 1, 2022. So I will pause really quick and first ask for weigh in from the task force. If you all could either, actually, I think chat is disabled, so please weigh in orally. If we all agree that DEQ would be the author of this report, obviously subject to our input, our outline, and our review. I would love to call a quick vote of the folks who are on the line, and I'll just go down who I see, all right, on my video screen. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that sounds good with DEQ drafting what we come up with. One question I had on process, because I know we were going to have, we designate time at the end of every meeting for public comment.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, and as I study the different straw proposals, I'm wondering if there's not a point where, whether it's the April 4th meeting or it's the meeting after that, one of the longer meetings, where we designate a period of time, whether it's maybe a little longer, half hour or an hour, where we hear from the public ahead of time on where we're narrowing down to what we're looking at, so they have something to actually comment on. It's kind of difficult to comment on something when there's different proposals out there. As we start to refine that, maybe there's a chance for them to have public comment that helps shape our discussion as we move forward and make our final decisions. And so I wanted to throw that out, other than because sometimes if it's at the end and we're deliberating and coming up and making decisions and they're commenting after we've done that, it doesn't quite make sense either. So I just wanted to see if there's a good point of the meetings where it makes sense to hear from them as we start to make these final decisions. I just wanted to throw that out from a process standpoint.
So from a process standpoint, this is not a public process, meaning that we do not actually require to have public input or editing. There's not a public comment period that's required for this task force.
That's right.
I would suggest, and I would look to Vice Chair Brandon to weigh in as well, but I would suggest that our tight timeline would not allow for the amount of time to be able to get that public input, though we do want to hear from folks at the end of each of these meetings, and we will hold 15 minutes at the end of this meeting to be able to get that public comment from everyone. And as a reminder, please message Alex to be able to put yourself in the queue that you want to put in public comment. I neglected to note at the top. Vice Chair Brandon, would you weigh in? What is your take on this consideration? Are you wishing to have a bigger piece of that, or are you veering on my end? And then we'll continue taking vote on the author of the report.
Yeah, Dylan, can you see me?
I can hear you. I can see you and hear you. Yes.
Wonderful. You all are flashing on my screen, so I apologize. I'm just gonna not look and try not to give myself a stroke with the strobing. I assume it's something in my internet. I'm inclined to agree that just given the accelerated timeline we're working under, that I would love to make sure we have space at the end of these calls, but probably I don't see a ton of opportunity to expand beyond that, especially given if we can't even push out another meeting 30 minutes, just given how tight everyone's timelines are. But would welcome creative thinking about other ways to get additional comments into the task force. Maybe written comments beforehand that the task force could review as homework, something like that. I'm open to creative thoughts there.
Thank you.
Chair, just really quickly, a point of correction. DEQ will not be the author. We will be the drafter of the report. The task
So
force
sorry. Yes.
is the author. Just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that, Alex. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Kramer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That was my comment. DEQ will be the scrivener, and based on our recommendations. So thank you for taking care of that, Alex.
Thank you so much. Senator Beyer, how do you feel about the DEQ being the scrivener of the report?
I'm absolutely supportive of DEQ being the drafter for us. Comfortable with that.
In the interest of saving time, I'm going to ask if any task force members are opposed to DEQ being the scrivener, and that way we can move on if there is not a challenge, and I'll pause. Terrific. I will pause. Speaking of pausing, I will pause because I believe we now have our newest task force member is able to get on and brook the technical challenges of getting on these Zoom calls, and would love to introduce Maya Bulow, engineering analyst and waste reduction specialist for Lane County, fleshing out the last of our task force membership. Maya, would you like to say anything to welcome yourself, and welcome to the task force?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry I'm late. Technical difficulties, apologize. Yes, I'm with Lane County, so I'm a waste reduction specialist. I started in my position here in August, and I'm working on the waste reduction team with the county. And we are really excited for all of the legislative changes that are coming down the pipeline from DEQ, and I'm thrilled to be on the task force and working with you all on this. And I think there are great things ahead for Lane County and for Oregon. So thank you very much, Dylan.
Thank you so much, Maya. Senator Beyer, yes.
Thank you, Dylan. I was thinking about Sean's comment, and I actually think we maybe want to think about that a little bit more about public comment. I remember in the original discussions that when we did 582, one of the criticisms of the previous work of that task force had been that there wasn't any opportunity for public comment. And I think we want to be careful to make sure that we address that. There may be different ways. I'm not sure that we need to do it on all of the straw man proposals, but at some point we may want to, a meeting out or something, give people a chance to comment or solicit it in writing. Be better if we give people a chance to do it verbally. Probably some different ways to do that, but we ought to think about that.
Thank you for that input, Senator Beyer. As a member of the steering committee, the recycling steering committee, we did have public comment as part of that. I will say, but perhaps it was not robust enough, and I think that is to Vice Chair Brandon's point. Perhaps we need to think creatively on how we're able to integrate that public comment or request it. So maybe that's a charge for the chair and vice chair to work on and then bring back to the group as a proposal. How does that sound, Senator Beyer?
That makes sense to do it that way. One of the things we could consider is maybe just having a special meeting of a subcommittee, or maybe even the chairs just doing a public hearing, if you will, to take comment on whatever we, I think it can get to where we have a draft proposal and people comment at that point.
Terrific. We will put our heads together and come back and suggest a proposal to the group when we meet next on April 4th. I think that gives us a reasonable amount of time to come up with some plans and come to you. Yes, Kristen, go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan. Another point I'd like to talk about that I think helps in this process, and for people that are paying attention, and we've had pretty good sized groups doing that so far. First of all, I want to thank you for posting up the presentation slides, DEQ, because I think that that's helpful for people to be able to go back and review that and see what the with the meeting notes, what happened and what the conversation was about. I think it would also be helpful if you could find a way to list the other attendees, since we do have them registering, we know who's participating. That might go to some of the conversation about who's had an opportunity to participate and hear about this process as it's gone forward. Because, you know, we've had up to 95 people sitting in on these conversations. So it is generating quite a bit of interest. And I think it would be helpful for all of us to see where that interest is. So if that could also be included with the meeting notes of the attendance, I would find that helpful. Thank you.
I'm going to put Alex on the spot. Is that something that's typically considered during these, as having public lists of attendees? I don't remember other task force that I've been a part of. I don't remember that being a feature, but I just wanted to see if that's something that is common, and if not common, you know, would be easy enough to put forward.
It's not typical that we would post that list of who arrives. We do keep that information, and obviously as folks registered, we do have that information. We could share it with the task force if you're interested there, but it typically doesn't get posted publicly.
Well, and if I may, that's kind of the difference of being not in-person meetings versus being on Zoom calls. If you were in an in-person meeting, when people sign in, you'd see exactly who's there. You'd participate with the people that are in the room. When we're on a Zoom call, we don't have the same ability to have that kind of interaction. And I think it's just one more way to clarify for the group where the interest is in this conversation. Thank you.
Perhaps a compromise could be that the list would be shared with the task force members, because you are able to click on now and see who the participants are, as are they. And that way that we can consider that, but without posting an entire list to the internet. Would that be a reasonable compromise, Kristen?
Sure, if it's fine with the group. To me, I mean, the same reason I wanted the presentations were up was that everybody that's participating sees the same information. So really, what your preference is and what that group's preference is. Thanks.
Alex, this is Senator Byer again. Actually, I think, you know, the cost of doing something electronically is pretty simple. It probably wouldn't be bad just to attach it if we do summary minutes or something, to do that, just to establish the record that people participated and had a chance to participate. So if the recommendations are called into question later, at least you have that record there saying they had a chance.
I will defer to the experience of both. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to also just kind of pipe in here and say I agree about having that part of public record, because as part of the Recycling Steering Committee, I know it was important near the end to have some people's comments, or we invited people from brand companies to come listen in. And I think if we know who was participating and listening on the calls, that might help us make that decision on potentially having an invite for a future meeting when we're kind of coming down with our final proposal. And second, I just wanted to mention, I think longer meetings are a good idea when we need them. And maybe if we can have an idea between now and the end of May, when those meetings may need to occur, that'll help me with my schedule in the future to make sure I can be there.
Thank you, Nicole. I believe that will be reflected in the doodle polls that we'll be asking you all to fill out. So I'll pause. It seems that there is a strong consideration for public posting of the lists. Is there anyone on that, before I get to you, Thomas, is there anyone on the task force that is opposed to putting those lists forward? And if not, then we'll direct our wonderful support from DEQ to post that publicly. Any opposition to it?
Dylan, I would just ask that we don't make that decision immediately, that we give opportunity for DEQ to think about the ramifications of the committee. I think the intent is to try to understand what industry and interest groups might be present, but I also think there might be an effect on community members or underserved communities in terms of having their names listed as not being participated in. And I just think that I think there's some unintended consequences that might be we might be felt by listing a list of participants that are viewing or watching the committee, and that tampering their interest in doing so.
Gotcha. Okay. That is a reasonable pushback. We will huddle back up. The chair, vice chair, and I will huddle up with DEQ to make sure that we work that through, and we'll come back to the task force again with where we land. And if we need to take a vote, we'll take a vote in the next meeting. But we are behind, so we are going to move on to the next slide, and really want to put this forward as some of the questions that I feel as we were looking at that scope screen of, looking at that scope, I have a proposed screen to make sure that we are taking these questions under consideration as a task force, is at least my interpretation of what that language is, and would love feedback on this. The questions being, did the task force study and evaluate misleading or confusing claims regarding the recyclability of products made on a product or product packaging? We have, and we will later on in this meeting. I believe that we have hit that metric. I believe the second question we still have to deeply consider, which is, did the task force consider issues affecting accessibility for diverse audiences? That's a conversation that I believe we have to have. And I think that having the screen in mind will help us put that forward. And Thomas, I appreciate you raising the question on the last. And then lastly is, does the task force need more information to make the decisions that we're going to need to make to be able to make those recommendations? And so my hope is that we're able to have these questions in mind, that we are thinking about this as we are reviewing the examples that we'll get into, as well as the straw person proposals that we'll be putting before the group. So with that, if you could go to the next slide, Alex. So we will dig into a little bit more, and Alex will be giving a presentation considering the various packaging pieces that we reviewed last time. But I wanted to talk about our next steps and see if there's anything that we need to add to or delete from. Our next step would be to review and narrow, after today's meeting, review and narrow and edit those straw person proposals. We have to see if there are any new ideas that are raised from that. I believe we need to define diverse audiences. And lastly, I'm going to call to doodle so we can get on everyone's calendar. I know it's going to be very difficult. We are all very busy and packed into these little Zoom boxes. And but I hope that you are able to prioritize this work as you raised your hand to be on this task force and we're appointed, and we have to be done by June 1, and we need to spend the time together to be able to get that work done. Are there any questions or edits to this next steps? And then we can start digging into the packaging examples that Alex has compiled and given feedback or some proposals to. Any thoughts? All right, hearing none, moving on. Another reminder, this is our guidepost, June 1, 2022. I know you're tired of me hearing it, but I just want to make sure that we have this in mind. We can't really kick this can down the road. We have to be done. And then now take it away, Alex. He's going to dig in on the effects on labeling and review some of the materials that we had reviewed in previous meetings and have a take on them. Alex, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Alex Bertolucci. I am the project manager for the Truth in Labeling Task Force with Oregon DEQ. At the last meeting, several of you shared examples of misleading or confusing claims. DEQ shared several examples as well. Sean Miller asked how California's SB 343 and the Recycling Modernization Act would affect those items, and whether items that are currently mislabeled would either be forced to give up such labels due to California's labeling law or would become eligible for recycling under Oregon's. In response to Sean's questions, DEQ has reviewed those examples, and next we'll share with you our informed speculation about what may change. I want to emphasize that we do not know for certain how the two laws will impact these items. The information we're putting forward today is based on today's recycling system, our reading of 343, and some speculation. Until California releases its study under SB 343 and Oregon releases its statewide recycling list, we won't know the answers with certainty. And even then, both state laws allow for circumstances to change. I will be moving through these quickly because we're a little behind, so I apologize if I'm going a little fast. So there's 3 questions we're going to be looking at with each item. First, could the item possibly be included on Oregon's statewide list? Second, could the item possibly use the chasing arrows symbol or make some sort of recyclability claim under SB 343? And lastly, would the current recycling or the current label possibly be allowed in its current form under SB 343? First, let's start with this sharps container. This item will most likely not make it on the Oregon statewide list. In California, we believe this item would most likely not be allowed to use the chasing arrows in this fashion because it's not a type of material and form that is routinely collected, sorted into defined streams, and sent to markets. Even though we assume the producer used the label here to indicate recycled content as opposed to recyclability, this label will likely be prohibited in the future due to SB 343. This PET insulation foam is often used in meal delivery boxes and is not currently collected curbside in Oregon, and it seems unlikely that it will be added to en-route recycling here in the near future. In California, this item is also not widely collected curbside, sorted, and sent to markets, so it's likely that it would not be allowed to use the chasing arrows or make the curbside recycling claim. An example of how California's law may reduce misleading labels here in Oregon. We're unaware of any recycling program that accepts multi-material filters in California or Oregon. This would probably not be allowed on Oregon's statewide list or considered recyclable under 343, and thus could not use the chasing arrows symbol in California. So again, another example of how California's law will remove labels that are misleading or deceptive here in Oregon. This toothpaste tube claims it's a number 2 recyclable item. Currently, this would be removed from most Oregon and California material recovery facilities as contamination. However, this item could, in the future, possibly be included on Oregon's statewide list. For example, if most of the toothpaste tubes transitioned to this format so that MRFs knew not to reject them, and if the PROs and DEQ agreed, after consultation with ORSAC, to add the material to the uniform statewide collection list. Currently, in California, this item is not routinely collected, separated, and sent to markets that we know of. We believe this item would most likely not be allowed to use the chasing arrow symbol in California, and we expect that would reduce contamination here in Oregon as well. This battery is not widely accepted curbside in Oregon, so it probably won't make the statewide list. In California, it would be allowed to use the chasing arrow symbol, even though it's not widely collected curbside, because federal law requires this label on certain types of batteries, and SB 343 does not supersede federal law. A future Oregon labeling law could not override federal law either, so no matter what the task force does, this battery will have the chasing arrows on it unless federal law changes. This dog toy with a number 7 inside the chasing arrows, as well as most number 7 plastics, are not commonly collected for recycling, sorted, and marketed in Oregon or California. It seems unlikely that this item would be included on Oregon's list or able to claim recyclability in California. If that's the case, then the use of the chasing arrows would be prohibited due to SB 343. However, this item could use the ASTM solid triangle with the 7 inside and be okay in California. For this item, it's very possible that the paperboard will make it on the Oregon statewide list. For the plastic, we don't know yet, although it is not currently accepted for recycling anywhere in Oregon. With current recycling in California, the paperboard would possibly be able to claim recyclability, but the plastic shell could not. The 100% recyclable claim would probably not be allowed in California because it seems unlikely that the plastic section will not meet California standards for being widely accepted, recycled, and used as feedstock in new material. If that changes, the label would be okay. The second part of the label, with the separate paper from plastic before recycling, would probably be allowed because Section 5 of SB 343 says that packaging comprised of multiple materials can use a chasing arrows symbol or statement indicating recyclability as long as it makes clear which other components of the product or packaging are not recyclable. So the 100% recyclable claim may be a problem, but the instructions to separate material would be appropriate. Plastic trays like this one are not currently widely accepted, processed, and sent in markets across California or Oregon, but markets are developing, so at this time, we can't say for sure if it would make it on the Oregon list or be allowed to use the chasing arrows or recyclability claim in California. However, there are multiple materials to this packaging: the tray, plastic wrap, and absorbent pad. Even if the tray itself meets California's threshold for access and recycling, the label would be prohibited in the future under SB 343 because under California's new labeling law, if you have a multi-material package and some components that are recyclable and others that are not, the label must make clear which materials can't be recycled, and this must be stated using the same font or symbol size as any claims about which material can be recycled. This label doesn't address the plastic film or absorbent pad, so it would likely violate SB 343. This beverage box may be included on Oregon's list, but likely not the Mylar type pouch. This is probably going to be the same for claiming recyclability in California. Box yes, pouch no. As for the label, we believe this symbol would probably not be allowed under SB 343 because it uses the recycling symbol, but fails to state which other components, such as the inner pouch, cannot be recycled. And lastly, this is an interesting one. This bottle has a full shrink sleeve that can make recycling difficult because optical sorters may reject the bottle. Bottles are currently widely recycled in Oregon, so it's possible it would be on Oregon's list. This item will most likely be allowed to claim recyclability in California as well. It's unclear if California would allow the recyclable claim we see here because the label doesn't instruct the user to remove and dispose of the label. Instead, it says to improve recycling, which implies you can still recycle it with the label on. If the label said something like remove and dispose of the label before recycling, that would possibly be allowed under SB 343. I know I moved quickly, but hopefully you got the gist of that. And Chair, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. That was incredibly helpful. And I'm glad we had that you did that exercise and worked with CalRecycle to be able to answer some of those questions, or at least, speculate. I apologize. Words have meanings. Speculate on some of those, the results of some of those labeling. And that really does tie into this, which we had talked about our Venn diagram last time, and thinking about as a group, as a task force, what problem are we attempting to solve? And I think that it is a powerful reminder of the strength of the two pieces of legislation that are going to be impacting the decisions that we're making here today. That for some of those materials in the future, with the Recycling Modernization Act, we'll have materials that will be accepted statewide, and so thus we'll be able to, at least for us, will not be posing a challenge for the recycling system. In addition, of course, we'll have our anti-contamination education campaigns that will be paid for by the producers. So on that side, and on the other side, being in California, that again, we saw some very strong examples of pieces that in the future that those packages will not be able to label it at all, or in the same way that they are, to be able to make sure that we're not confusing consumers. And so it is I think a powerful reminder of what is the issue in the future that we're trying to solve. I reflect back on the last meeting of, we all know what the problem is today, but to look in that, have that lens on what that future state will be is quite powerful. And looking at this particular example, you know, the purple that we see here around are things that would be outside, that our understanding currently, you know, again, would be that this would be outside the pieces that would be able to be either on the accepted materials list or would be able to be labeled as recycling. And we're really just looking at the Venn diagram in the middle of all of those things that would be accepted. And then what is the challenge if something is accepted for recycling in Oregon, but would not be able to be labeled as such, or would be labeled as recyclable in California, but may not be accepted for recycling in Oregon. I'm going to pause really quick, and I feel like we got this at the very end of the last meeting, and I wasn't sure that it was fully understood. And so would love to have some, see if there's any questions from the task force, or is this landing with everyone this time in terms of what we are trying to solve with the task force, you know, and the recommendations that may come out of the straw person proposals. All right. Well, hearing none, Alex, I really appreciated that. Oh, sorry, Kristen, you
Dylan,
raised your hands. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a quick comment. I think this is a good example of maybe what's happening in California versus what could be happening in Oregon, but I'm not sure that this group is here to try and solve the distinctions and differences between the two states. So I just would say as a summary point, I think that it's good to see what the differences might be and how it could work together. But you know, California is California and we are not. So.
Well, no, but the packages that would be sold in California would be the same packages that would be sold in Oregon. So thus, if you are trying to put a recyclability claim on a package, you would not be allowed to put it in California. So that it actually does have an impact on what happens here, because there are not, packaging producers don't make packaging specifically for the state of Oregon. They make it for a region of which we are a part of. And so that is actually a connection to those pieces, that it would, yes. The issues that would be put forward would be, you know, those packages would be disallowed, and that would then be an impact on the market that we are, because obviously we are a far smaller market than California would be.
Sure, the packages are the same, but the labeling could be different.
It could be, but the packaging producers don't make labels for specific states. They make them for their packages. The only examples are ones that are adjusted for a particular state. They don't actually make an Oregon specific label for that. They sell to a much broader and larger market.
Sure, but for example, there are differences in labels for things for bottle bill, just as an example of labeling.
But that's an adjustment to that. That is not that's not a label that would be sold in toto to our market. That's a response to something, not the actual sales too. So again, that would not be a problem that would be impacting us, at least if it were there, because again, it wouldn't be, they wouldn't add something to it, you know, to then not make it allowed in Oregon. That wouldn't make any sense. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Well, no, Mr. Chair, I think you made most of the comments I was going to respond to, that we're such a small market here to think that we can go at this alone and expect manufacturers just to create Oregon only packaging is unrealistic. And so, yes, California's often led this effort, and that's why it is important to look at what they're doing. But I worry about the comments that we don't need to look around us, especially with one of the largest economies in the world just south of us, and think that Oregon can do something on its own. And so I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Sean. Jenny, and then Kristen.
I guess in my role on this committee as the representation of a packaging company, I can tell you to create completely different products based on recyclability for different states is not a small undertaking, considering the supply chain of where our products are coming from and then meeting different market demands. The supply chain issues right now are a challenge to just get products here in the first place, that if Oregon is requiring something completely separate, there's a good chance that Oregonians just might not find those products. It's a very challenging proposition to create just when you consider all of the product testing, meeting ASTM standards, meeting standards for toxins, et cetera, to develop a completely separate product development line just to meet the requirements of one state is something that is not going to be a particularly smooth undertaking, I would say.
Thank you, Jenny. Kristen, then Maya, then Dan.
Yeah, so just in response, I'm not suggesting we don't consider what is happening with the states around us. I mean, obviously, I think some of the push that we're seeing now is because California did pass Senate Bill 343 in the form that it is in, and it provides more of an opportunity for all of us to look internally at our states as well as the states around us to see what is happening. But I would say that, you know, for example, in the 2021 session, a bill passed on flushable wipes that has an Oregon specific label, if I'm not wrong. My point is that California is a very big tail wagging a dog, but it is not the only thing for us to consider in this conversation. Otherwise, we could probably just adjourn and wait and see what California does. You know, I've heard and I expect, and it would not surprise me to see changes in California's law. And I think we have an opportunity here to suggest what we think is the best approach for Oregon that also then may be considered by states such as California or other states as well as they continue to determine how they are going to implement the law they have passed or potentially amend it going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Maya?
Hi, yes, thank you. So I just wanted to add, I'm sorry if I missed this when I was not here earlier. So if this has been brought up, I just wanted to ask the group also about considerations for the federal level initiatives on this front. So I've seen that EPA has convened a labeling initiative of some sort of group that is addressing this, and I saw that in the straw person proposals, there were some proposals that discussed federal level alignment in Oregon, and I think that just in this conversation around how do we consider the larger climate in which we're making this decision. So what is Washington doing? You know, Seattle is often leading the way, and I think having regional agreement for labeling would be a great thing. So if we could talk to our neighbors in the north and the south and consider what EPA is doing, I do think that would really strengthen whatever decision we come to, even if it compromises on some fronts. That's all. Thank you.
Maya, we did not discuss it at the beginning of the call, just to bring you up to speed, but it will be part of the next conversations when we're doing the straw person proposals. And yes, we'll get to there. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. And I don't want to belabor, just would echo the comments of those before me about the challenges with some sort of Oregon specific labeling requirement. I also, though, want to sort of put a reminder out there, and we don't need to belabor this either, but it's not clear to me and maybe Alex can address this too in the presentation he gave. It was super helpful to see all those examples, but I would like to remind everybody that there are actually two standards sort of set out in SB 343 down in California. One is for at curbside and one is for materials not collected at curbside. And I at some point, I'm curious to understand if and how that feeds into this conversation, because there are significant challenges in those particularly in the non-curbside requirements for labeling in California as that new law moves forward. And I just wanted to mention that. I don't think we've talked a lot about that, but maybe at some point it'd be interesting to hear from Alex and David about if they see implications around what might happen in Oregon on that different standard for non-curbside collection.
Great question. I'll let Alex answer directly. I will say that we're hoping to have both David Alloway and Dan Brown back for the next meeting, so we can, when we're doing our editing of our straw person proposals, to be able to ask some of those questions. But Alex, can you at least slightly answer that now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's a great point that Dan Brown from CalRecycle will be here at the next meeting, or has agreed to be here. So these questions might be better directed towards him, but as we were going through those materials, none of them were collected at the level that SB 343 calls out for being able to use the recyclability indication on those labels as well. It's, I believe, 60%, moving up to 75% in 2023, or excuse me, 2030. And so with that, those numbers are fairly large for recovery rates. And we didn't see any of the items that we went through having those recovery rates currently.
Thank you, Alex. Sean?
Yeah, I just want to echo again the importance of a regional approach, and I know the wipes bill from last session, or actually the session before, on the do not flush is a good example of a regional approach because it was considered in our states. I know right just prior to the north of us in Washington, and so we did build upon that and try to keep it a regional approach that worked for manufacturers and retailers, and so. Again, I think that bill is a good example of what we're trying to do to keep this consistent.
Thank you. Very helpful. Kristen, go ahead. You have another comment? You're on mute.
Thanks. Just a quick question for Sean then. So the Oregon bill that passed is also in place in Washington and California. That's kind of what you mean by that regional approach.
Washington, I'm sure of. I'll have to check on California, but I know Washington actually did it the session prior, and again, those discussions took place up there first, but we modeled ours after that, and was a consensus.
Thank you. Very helpful. Jenny?
Just a quick comment to add on to what Maya was asking about. There is quite a lot of other regional and federal legislation that is pending around packaging too, particularly around PFAS. And I do see a lot of regional collaboration on some of those. So I think that there's already a precedent out there for how we are approaching our legislative approach to packaging. And so it's not like this would be something new where we're working together as a region to address how we manage packaging for sustainability, recycling, all of that, toxins. And so I would definitely encourage us to look at how some of those other processes have gone as an example for how we might approach our labeling question here.
Thank you, Jenny. Are there other questions or comments about this? This has been a good dialogue to think about what the challenge that we have, and to have this in mind and this conversation in mind as we go through our straw person proposals. All right, hearing none, we can move to the next slide. And with that, we are going to dig into those straw person proposals. There is a note in the chat that I will echo, that if you as an attendee would like to provide public input, please message Alex and he'll put it in queue and call on you at the before the hour. If I believe we're on time, I look to Alex to make sure that we are, and the way that we had set it up is that we have time for 5 minutes for a presentation for the straw person and 5 minutes to ask and answer questions for each of the proposals. Is that accurate, Alex?
That's correct. We're about 5 minutes behind right now, but I don't currently have anyone signed up for public input, so we are doing okay.
Terrific. So I will be the timekeeper for our presentations, and I believe they're going to happen in the order that they came in, so you get to see who came in last. And first we have Kristen Mitchell from Aura, who will give her proposal, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions. Go ahead, Kristen.
Great. So mine was the first in or the last in? Just
No. Mine was the last in, Kristen.
Oh.
You'll find out soon. Yours was the first. You did your homework best and first. Go ahead.
Really? Wow. My teachers would be so proud of me. In fact, they wouldn't recognize me, no question. So I see you've summarized this from the information that we sent, and I think hopefully some of you had a chance to review the work that Will Postgate and Dave Larmuth and I did on this. We tried to look at this question from what our goals have been always in the process of labeling issues, which are our feeling that consumer confusion leads to contamination, which causes the issues in the material processing facilities that mean we can't access markets. And that maybe sometimes instead of sending things that should be recycled or we expect them to be recycled, instead they end up in the waters of the world, maybe far away from where we are. So this is a first step for us, is dealing with the labeling issue. And if you've looked at some of the materials you've seen that the DEQ's put up on its external information, you know that at least in a 2020 poll, 67% of the time people look at labels. So we think it's more important than just kind of an afterthought of, we've got other big issues to deal with, let's deal with labeling, but not spend maybe as much attention or put the attention to it that we feel is very important in the process. So that's kind of our background. We looked at the UN information that was there, as well as our goals in this process, which are stop greenwashing, stop confusing customers, and start providing information on labeling that is accurate in communities and is accessible to all of our members in our communities. So reaching on those equity pieces that we all believe are important. Because time is short, our goal would be, as you've noted, first to focus on the plastic packaging. That's the big issue that has raised the consciousness of this conversation with our public, with the world public. It's the issue that we see continuing in our oceans and in other areas. It's the one that is, I think, the most ripe for correction from an environmental justice standpoint, to make sure we aren't sending things to places that can't deal with them. So let's focus on plastic. We can get to the rest of it down the road. We can talk more about other items that are problematic in a collection system, but let's start at the top with the issue that is the one for our time. So from our position, our view on this is that plastic packaging must be on the Oregon Uniform Statewide Collection List. That's a term that you'll see in Senate Bill 582. Sorry, your notes are a little bit different than mine, so I'm going to look at mine for a second. So it has to be on the list and collected in the commingled stream in order to be labeled as with the chasing arrows. So the way we do this is commingled collection. Only packaging that's collected in that commingled stream can use the arrows. You can go beyond that and do what we show as an example of that, of if it doesn't meet this, then you get the circle with the line through it that says that's not going to happen. We think this meets the goals of reaching our audience. It's very clear that in Oregon, chasing arrows, that means recycling. In Oregon, chasing arrows, line through it, that means you don't. That's one way for us, we feel, to meet the broadest group of these materials that right now are for the plastics. Then the next question we come to is, yeah, we need a resin identification code, so let's do that. Let's do one that makes it very clear that that's all it's about, that it doesn't have to have a symbol around it or something else that confuses people. It speaks to the people that need to hear it. Those are the processors of plastics. They need to know what those resin codes are, and we need to have a way to list that. If you're going to have the next claim is, if plastic packaging is not on the Oregon USCL for commingled collection, it can't have the chasing arrows on it on any location or make other claims about being recyclable. Then we've got, let's see what you went to. Our comments then are that we provide time for our packaging producers to prepare for these changes. For example, matching up timelines to the Oregon USCL commingled collection designations. So once that designation is made, packaging people have the opportunity to take 18 months or longer to make those changes on their labels. We recognize if it comes off or comes on, you're going to have those time frames. We could align it with California's SB 343 to modify timelines if it's appropriate, or we could align it with the bottle bill timelines of the recent wine can edition. That's not going to happen until 2025, so that gives you 3 years. There are different ways to do this. We think enforcement is important. And I don't know why those aren't all on here. Maybe you've got them on another slide, but enforcement, we talked about the possibility of using the PRO as a way to remove a non-compliant product from sale in Oregon. We don't want the enforcement issue to be on the grocers, but the source of the labeling. And then there are things you need to consider in there. We understand, of course, you know your business more than we do, but inventory issues. We thought you could look at modifications of existing enforcement elements from other laws, what happens in the Oregon's bottle bill, or this new flushable wipes bill, that labeling bill. There are ways that we could look at those to modify them and make them work in Oregon. And then we also think it's important that we make some changes at the national level. So our suggestion is you do require the plastics industry working through the PROs to propose and advocate for federal legislation to remove the chasing arrows laws in all 36 remaining states. You can do that at a federal level, or they can go state by state and take it off, same way it was put on back in the early 90s. You set specific dates for those changes and require the plastic packaging PRO members to pay increased escalating echo modulation fees that you determine later for those deadlines that aren't met, and use those additional fees to do more contamination reduction efforts and consumer education. Then there are probably other ways we can contemplate using echo modulation fees for incentives or disincentives, but those are the ones we came with first. And then that the PROs run the statewide ad campaigns to teach Oregonians about how these label changes affect them in their communities. So that was not my best presentation, sorry, kind of threw me off by the slide example, but I think you got the point, and you certainly got the 3-page homework that we did. So.
Yes. Thank you for that, Kristen. We went a little bit over our 5-minute slot, and we attempted to summarize it as we best did. Obviously, it was a 3-page proposal. Trying to put it into a slide that was able to get it was challenging.
No,
so,
I'm not complaining.
Terrific. And all of the task force members have access to that, and we will also make that available, along with the slides of the task force. Are there any questions for Kristen as we dig in on this? I would love to hear comments or questions from the task force. This is the time that we have. We have 4 minutes. Go ahead, Dan, and then Nicole.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Kristen, for this. As you'll see in my straw person, I think we have some alignment there, so I'm encouraged by that. I had one question and one comment, and I guess the comment is that I think the echo modulation component of number 6 up on the slide is probably already addressed sufficiently within the statute for the law for RMA. So I'm curious to see how that would fit in if something like that moved forward. But more a comment or a question then, I guess, is there precedent in Oregon for requiring an industry, in this instance, packaging producers and manufacturers, to pursue federal legislation? You'll see in my straw person, that's what we want as well, but I'm not sure, and maybe it's not a question for you, but for DEQ, is can you actually require in Oregon law for people to do something at the federal level or in 36 states? Again, we have the same goal. I'm just not sure if you can require that in statute. So welcome comments now, or DEQ maybe can follow up on that later on.
Yeah, I can't answer that from the perspective of if it's been done before, but I think you can make decisions in state law about what is going to be an acceptable product to be sold into Oregon based on a number of different factors. And this is one that I think is important, because every time I see other suggestions for legislation, it says things like, well, we're going to match up the packaging and remove the chasing arrow symbol. But if any other state or other jurisdiction requires those symbols, then of course they're going to be able to continue to sell those into Oregon until that changes. Well, if 36 other states continue to have the same chasing arrow symbols in place, unless there's some method to ensure that that changes, I don't see it changing. I mean, we all know the process that happened in the late 90s to ensure that the chasing arrows was required on every resin identification code in those 38 states that passed it, including Oregon in 1991. And I haven't seen any effort on the part of the same industry that ensured that would happen to make the changes to remove it. So I think this is an example to let the industry really step up and show that it means what it says when it wants to talk about recyclability, talk about environmental concerns, and show their true colors of the expectation that what they caused, they can also help correct.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Kristen. We are running low on time. So Nicole, ask a quick question, and Kristen, if you could do a quick answer, I'd appreciate it.
I'll do my best.
Mine will be a quick question. I won't ask everything I was going to. Mine specifically goes around point number 3, a resident ID code alone. I know quite a bit of the packaging has a lot of numbers and different things, and I'm wondering if I'm just curious how you came up with that. To me, it looks like a very confusing thing to introduce versus maybe just a triangle. Maybe it's not the chasing arrows with a 1, 2, or 3 in it.
My entire goal on that and our goal as a group is to avoid the confusing labeling piece. I think that the triangle that's in place currently for the resident identification code under the ATSM is just as confusing from the size of it for people to be able to see it. And honestly, I don't know why you need a symbol on this when really all you really need to know is which resident identification code it is. But I would leave that more to the processors, which are like Will Postgate, who could answer that. But I know it's a short timing, so I'm going to leave it at that. And if he disagrees with me, he'll raise his hand too. So.
Thank you. And last, Sean, very quickly, and then we have to move to the next presentation.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I want to bring this up because it applies to all of the straw proposals. But for Kristen, I wanted to clarify on number 6, the enforcement, since I think your straw proposal went into detail there and the only one. When you mention who is going to be liable, I mean, you talk about that, but I'm assuming you mean that we follow the definition of the producer language in 582, which is in section 3 and in section 4 that we worked on with DEQ, all of last session. And if you follow that, it has to be section 3 and 4 that you will actually get to the true person responsible for the label, even if it's a market condition that leads you there through the PRO. And so I just wanted to ask the question, would that be your intent? Because that would apply in all of the straw proposals is how I see it.
Sure, I would be more than willing to, I think this is an opening piece of discussion and how to do it. And our goal is to put the enforcement at the source, not at retail, not at other places, at the source where it happens. So if that language is the appropriate language in SB 582, and I didn't go back and look at the definitions when we were working on that, then absolutely, yes.
It is from the retail. It is from the retail perspective when you take section 3 and 4. And so I just wanted to call that out for any of the proposals. That's something that we would want.
Yeah, obviously this is a first shot, quick 2-week, here's what we got. And absolutely, there's more room for conversation. Yeah, thanks for raising that.
Perfect. Dan and Nicole, your hands are still raised. Did you have a follow-up or no?
No,
okay,
I'm sorry.
Great. Just double checking. All right. Thank you, Kristen. So again, I think that we should, as a task force, fully review these presentation or the full proposal, and we can bring that back for discussion next up is Tom Eggleston. Tom, do you want to do your quick proposal?
Sure. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, everybody. I'll just say that this is a true straw person proposal. I think it's just something in my first take in what's the most feasible, reasonable solution or path forward. So I think number one, I hate to call it status quo because what is happening in California is by no means status quo. So I think the presentation today also demonstrated that most of the challenges we're talking about and that our consumers are facing in terms of confusion will be addressed and by the state of California. Also recognize, which I think was pointed out earlier, the market share of the economy of California being a 40 million person state versus the market share of Oregon being a 4 million person state has a lot more weight and influence over global brands. We do operate in a global economy, whether we like it or not. Oregon is not a microcosm by itself in the global economy. So I think that it would be really challenging for producers, especially smaller ones that are not based in Oregon, to meet an unique to Oregon standard. Over time, as SB 4343 goes into play and it starts to evolve, we will still have opportunities to review whether it plays out like we suspect it will, acknowledging all the disclaimers that were on those presentations going forward. I also think it would be important to continue to support national legislation. I think the real solution is at the national level. The economy of the United States is much more powerful than even just the economy of California. So some more enforcement of the green guides, some more specific requirements in the green guides might also tackle not just recyclability claims, but other misleading sustainability and product claims. That's where I'm at.
Terrific. And I that was very efficient. So thank you. Thank you for that, Thomas. I would love to see if there's any questions about this. And again, I think while Kristen's was a bit more formal, a number of the others are really truly bullets or straw persons to consider. And I would say that think about the recycling steering committee process, those who are on this, to think of these as components that we could potentially combine as we get to the end. So any questions for Thomas as we dig in? Again, he kind of said status quo, although it's not really the status quo, it's kind of status quo plus almost. I think there's some of the same questions, Thomas, that I have on the second piece of, how the supporting labeling improvements at the federal level, like what functionally how that would occur, because I agree it would be good to have Oregon weigh in, but like what path we have for that would be something worthy of exploration. So thank you for that. Okay, so hearing no questions, maybe we can go to the next set of the next presentation. And we have actually two presentations in one. So Dan, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. And really on the left-hand side is sort of a hybrid, well, let me say this. It is a hybrid vision sort of too in the same theme as what Tom said. So Mayor Penn's first preference would be that Oregon do nothing and get something done at the federal level. And that's what you see on the left-hand side here. However, we think it needs to be more than just FTC green guides. That's a component, but because the FTC green guides are really an enforcement mechanism and not a statutory mechanism, we're interested in exploring having something done at the federal level through the EPA in collaboration with the FTC. And that is what you see there on the left side. So again, sort of like Tom, a hybrid between 1 and 2 without Oregon itself doing anything. To move over onto the right side is in recognition that it's entirely possible through this task force, the recommendation will be something more Oregon specific. And in respect of the likelihood, or see where this discussion goes, that is what you see on the right-hand side, which is something more specific to Oregon. And we would agree that you should prohibit labeling uncovered packaging that makes it deceptive or misleading recyclability claim, prohibit the use of prohibit use of the chasing arrows or the symbol or around the resin identification code if that covered packaging, if you will, is not included in a PRO program. I could have also said there, then the presumption is that it's included on the Oregon statewide recycling list. You can see there that I have sort of what Kristen mentioned, but I'm more focused under those sub bullets there about allowing recyclability labeling. The best example that I saw earlier was from Alex with the battery, where it's required in some other jurisdiction, you have to have something on there, specific to a mandate from another state or at the federal level. And then you can see down there at the bottom, we have one additional element that would ask DEQ to look at if something happens at the federal level after whatever is implemented in Oregon, the DEQ look at that, whatever is happening at the federal level, and give consideration as to whether or not that meets the requirements that Oregon secured potentially through statute, and give consideration to that. So that's it very quickly in a nutshell, Dylan. Again, you've got a federal approach, recognizing that if that doesn't happen, we propose the state proposal. And you can see on the very bottom there, it is aligned with some language that was under consideration to the north in Washington State in Senator Doss's EPR bill.
That's terrific, Dan. So just out of curiosity, was this run by anyone, or is this also a kind of a straw person proposal from your end? I'm just trying to see what level of review. I'm trying to think of what's legal or not with some of the pieces.
So none of this, I would not say this has had a legal review, but the approach on the left is something we're working through with our members and having some discussions candidly. Many people are aware we're having discussions at the federal level on that approach. And we supported the approach on the right because it was part of the negotiation through the Washington bill. So yes, it got as far as to say we were supportive of it, felt it was a reasonable approach.
Great. Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm curious how the Oregon specific approach would interface with California's approach. So it seems like the Oregon specific approach would say if other states require the chasing arrows are included on a package, like 36 states require the chasing arrows in the resin code, those products wouldn't be allowed to be sold in California if they weren't part of the 60% captured. So would this, if this was Oregon's approach, would we actually get more misleading labels in Oregon than if we just followed California's approach? Because we would be relying on, we wouldn't be requiring, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think I probably could have done a better job of giving that third bullet down on the right-hand side some further description, because we're not trying to give a blanket whatever 36 other states are doing, is acceptable. We're looking for those special circumstances. And I'm going to go back to that example again, not packaging, but there are other instances in packaging that Alex gave earlier around the battery. We're not trying to do a quick, easy, clever carve out here for those 36 other states, because we want to get something done at the federal level. We recognize that problem of having that requirement in those other states. And I think I probably could have, in my straw person, presented that better to Dylan and Alex.
That's helpful. And reflecting on that, Thomas, your question and the thing, and then I'll call on you, Kristen, is that this is the type of thing that under California, depending on what law the packaging producers are going to decide to defer to, whether it's the California law or whether it's those other 30 some states that require the chasing arrows, that they're going to have that tough decision to make. Like, for instance, on that dog bone that we saw, that will not be allowed under California law, if I'm interpreting it correctly, SB 343, but it technically would still be under those others. So they're going to have to decide what those pieces are. My suggestion is they would likely follow California, would be my guess. Kristen, go ahead.
Thanks. So just to confirm that point, Dan, because that's why I had my hand raised, and also my question is, it seems like the second bullet and the third bullet don't align. And so what you're suggesting is you're not really saying that you allow recyclable labeling if it's required in every other state of those 36 states. So you would suggest something different than that? Because I know this is the bill that didn't pass in Washington, but how would American deal with that issue of those 36 other states?
Well, again, we're trying to find a compromise here on on Oregon, if it ends up being an Oregon specific approach, but we're recognizing I'll just give you an example. The third party labeling system is, an example of that, not the only one out there, but is a how to recycle program. And we envision that if you first and foremost go up to the top bullets, you've got to be on the list for the state of Oregon, if we're going to have a requirement to put that product out. And our hope is we eventually get that requirement in those other states and lift it at some point. But again, we're not trying to get sideways with the 36 other states, but recognize that there's going to be a list established and in Oregon, and that under the PRO's requirements to be, covering those materials on that list is sort of the path forward that we see.
So the 36 states continue to be the biggest issue, which I agree with you, it would be best if the industry could move forward and get something done at the federal level that removes that requirement everywhere, which then takes that piece off of the conversation completely. But the how to recycle label, for example, I think is still very problematic here, because if you can recycle it 60% of the time, that means 40% of the time you probably can't. So when you talk about consumer confusion and trying to clean up contamination, that doesn't really help us unless it's much more directed about what really happens on the USCL in a commingled stream. And by the way, commingled streams can be collected curbside, and they can also be collected at depot. I just want to make sure you understand the distinction in Oregon, because when we worked on a uniform statewide collection list statewide, we also recognized that cities and counties have the ability and authority to determine how those materials are going to be collected. But the point was to make sure that in every place in this state, it's on the list so that you can recycle that material wherever you live in some form, whether it's curbside or in other smaller communities that are different, whether it's in a depot system or something like that, which I think might help also answer the question that you had asked earlier on commingled versus curbside and what happened in California. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm not, I think we're in alignment that the best path forward is get something done at the federal level, or, heaven forbid, state by state, to get that 36, to get that change. And I'm not here to endorse how to recycle. I have members obviously who use the program and others who don't. So I've just used that as an example, but I'm not saying it may not have its own problems as well.
I couldn't agree more that the federal level is the right place to do it. But the question is, what's going to require that to happen? And just wishing it doesn't make it so. So, what do we do to put some teeth in that and actually see a change? Yeah, and if you've got great ideas about Congress, please pass those on to everybody. Thanks.
Well, I have ideas that might not be great, right?
All right. Well, thank you for that, Maya, and then Thomas.
Thank you. So I have just a question for my own clarification around if when this California laws start to become enacted, and maybe this is something Jenny can speak to too, is I'm wondering what producers of packaging, and they're selling into different regions, are they producing regional specific? Can you guys hear me, Thomas?
We can. You cut out a little bit, Maya.
Can you hear me?
Ahead.
Okay.
You just keep going,
okay.
Maya.
Sorry. Yeah. So, okay. Thank you. So I'm just wondering if that kind of pull from the California law, is that going to put pressure on producers, to put pressure on their state legislature to be enacting changes to follow suit with California? Because will some smaller producers just decide only to produce for California, for example, because they don't have the funds to be producing separate labels for different regions? Or how does that look like on the producers side of things? I'm just curious how much pressure that's going to put on those 36 states to get on board with this change.
Jenny, do you want to respond? She asked you directly, and then I can maybe follow up as well.
Sure, I can just briefly answer that. We don't produce recyclable packaging. We do compostable, but from our experience with that, I can tell you that whenever new legislation is passed, we do a lot of product testing to make sure that we can comply with that testing, because most packaging is sold through a really wide and complicated broker and distributor network that we have contracts with. We don't really pick and choose what states we operate in. If our brokers or distributors like a Cisco or an Aramark want to sell in a certain state, then we try to make sure that we comply with the regulations that are in that state for that type of packaging. And then we do what we need to do to make sure that what we're selling it complies with the law. And oftentimes in California, I can tell you right now, to comply with all the different packaging legislation, it's an insanely expensive process, but we do it, right? Because we want to serve the customers in that state. It really is an added cost, and the costs, do go up for sure to do that, but it does get done. It just often can take a very, very long time and involve a lot of product development, product testing, and sometimes changes to the chemistry itself. That's the short answer.
Thank you, Jenny. Dan, do you want to follow up that? Because I feel like that question kind of hits on you as well, in terms of the pressure on state legislatures or other pieces. And then Thomas, then we'll move to the next
Yeah,
presentation.
I'm gonna not respond directly, only because I think you just heard from a packaging producer, which is a better response than I can give.
Fair. Okay, Thomas, hit us, and then we'll answer and then move to the next piece.
I was just going to call out an observation I made, and just now in this past conversation, and I think, Kristen, you called out that 60% means 40% is wrong. I think that's a really good observation. I also think SB 582 gives Oregon a really unique opportunity to push the PROs to recycle what we want them to recycle in Oregon. And we can make that better. I think we have influence over what's on our uniform statewide collection list very explicitly, and we've already gone through the legislative process to get that authority and working with industry. So if they're recycling 70% of something in California, that means it's technically feasible to do that in Oregon. And if we can get that on our list in Oregon, we have more control over how much of that material is getting recycled. So I think that's another way I'm thinking about it too, is flexing the muscles that SB 582 gave the state to push for technology improvements in some of our recycling infrastructure and processing so we can recycle more items and have more recyclable materials in our state.
We'll put, Thomas, that's going to be echoed in one of my bullets when we get there. Maya, go ahead, and then we need to move to the next presentation.
Sorry, yes, I'll be brief. Because this infrastructure piece triggered something in my mind, which is, I think that in this conversation, as we're getting further along in the recommendations, we really do also need to consider that with the funding, the state, federal funding coming down for this solid waste infrastructure for recycling in the infrastructure bill, there's going to be a lot of changes to the infrastructure piece in the recycling and waste management system as well. So we do need to think about the fact that a lot of these products will be coming into the recycling system of the future. So we don't necessarily, we want to make sure we think about, designing for the future infrastructure that we want, the infrastructure that we have. So I just wanted to put that.
Maya, I'm sorry. I'm actually, we're doing okay on time because we don't have any more public comments. So I'll say that. But the very last piece, your landing of that didn't come through. So could you rephrase that or repeat it? Rather?
Sorry, I think my headphones might be dying. I said we should just keep in mind that we want to be designing for the infrastructure that we will have and that we want to have, not the one necessarily that we have right now.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if that's what you said, so I'm glad you repeated that. So terrific. All right. Well, with that, let's move to the next piece. And again, I think we went over on a couple of these, but that's okay because we do not have any public comments at this time, so we can continue the conversation, perhaps even go back to some. So let's go to the next presentation, Alex. Vice Chair Branton.
Thank you. And this is truly a straw proposal in its rawest form. So I apologize in advance for not having it as tightened as I would have loved it to be before sharing with this group, but figured getting ideas out the door is better than waiting for perfection. And I loved hearing some of the other proposals. So thank you to everyone else who did their homework in advance of me, because I got to hear some places where there might be alignment. I think first and foremost, requiring really clear standardized labeling for items that are on Oregon's statewide recycling collection list. That seems to be something that I've heard as aligned with the rest of this group. And that is something that is likely pretty aligned with California as well. And then the added piece here that I have also heard alignment around from both Christian's presentation, Dan, you hit on this a little bit as well, but requiring, going a step further and requiring really clear standardized do not recycle labels. So either a chasing arrow with a strike through, as Dan and Christian mentioned, or words including like do not on products that are outside of our statewide collection list and are not accepted in California. So this is really trying to go after, thinking about that Venn diagram that our chair beautifully showed us, those purple, that purple sphere of products that may have previously been labeled with some sort of misleading claim or misleading recyclability claim, right? We are not doing this proposal in a vacuum. And so we have to think back to the decades plus of recycling information that our customers have had. And so thinking about how we move forward with that information to make our recycling system of the future as accurate and as representative as possible. Recognizing, we also don't want this to, I don't want this to be prohibitive for, certain materials that are on the threshold. Maybe they're not at 60%, which is, a whole separate conversation of whether or not that's a great threshold for these things, but maybe they're at 55%, they're not on the list, but they're close, maybe they're accepted in California, but not in Oregon, thinking about how we can creatively craft this. I would really welcome thoughts and feedback here to make sure we are not prohibiting items that are kind of in one of those yellow or red categories, but really kind of narrowing this specifically on the items that are most misleading and have been most problematic in our waste stream in the past. and then really kind of the last step here is, prohibiting the sale of any products that do make those misleading claims that are not in Oregon statewide collection list. So if you are, misleading the public intentionally, right? I was reviewing a sunscreen tube that says like, please recycle this. And you're begging customers to do something that is actively wrong. Making sure that we in Oregon are using our authority to prohibit that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brandon, and great. And again, these were meant to be open. They didn't have to be formal. These are bullets. This is totally appropriate. I say this because mine are true straw person bullets as well. So with that, Dan looks like has his hand raised and has a question for you. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Not so much a question, but just a comment that I wanted to be clear that American's not advocating for do not recycle labels as a mandate. Rather, we were just taking out of the California law, it is permissible to use the chasing arrows if you have the strike through. So subtle, well, not so subtle difference versus we're not looking to have a mandate in Oregon on a do not recycle label, but that's an example of an instance where it should be permissible if the strike through is over the chasing arrow. Thanks. And I also want to appreciate Maya's comments, and you started to allude to that a little bit too, Anya, about, those materials that are close to getting there or going to get there, and the backup that infrastructure could help with that is all good. So I appreciate those comments.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarity, and sorry, I did not mean to misspeak and put words in Mayor Penn's mouth.
Yeah. Oh, Jenny, go ahead.
Just a really quick comment. Putting a do not recycle label on something is not a big ask for producers. So I don't want us to get confused in the conversation. And Anya, I'm not saying that you're doing this at all. Like what you said is actually very clear, but I think that it is a confusing topic for some people where the truth in labeling, I think we get really caught up in the product design and designing for recyclability, which is one really big conversation, versus continuing to have a wide variety of products, but being very clear that many of those products cannot be recycled. And I think that, that what Anya is proposing is not asking a whole lot from the packaging producer standpoint. Putting a different label on for a different state is something that I think is pretty achievable.
Thank you, Jenny. Nicole, go ahead.
Thank you. I actually am going to piggyback a little bit on what Jenny was just saying. And yeah, the do not recycle, I also think that might be a little too much to put on a label, because it may once again be misleading. But you just made a comment, Jenny, about designing for recyclability. And I'm wondering if we should think of it in a way that maybe, and this is kind of a question for Jenny, if we had a label that talked about this, product has recycled content or was made to be recyclable in the packaging versus, the state of Oregon or Western Alliance of what can be recycled on our list. I'm just wondering if we should maybe think about it that way on packaging as well.
So Nicole, can I just ask, you mean like as a regional approach? And then Anya, I'm sorry, I talked over you. I apologize.
I was going to ask a clarifying question as well. So
okay.
Yeah, no. So yeah, when we're thinking about if we're going to have whether it's a regional or we're aligning with California, and we're thinking about designing for recyclability, and that I'm an end user, as many of you know. I mean, I run a plastic recycling company, and the biggest issue is pull through demand to make sure we have end markets. I think all of us agree with that. So when we're going down this road, do we need to make sure that we're thinking about, the APR design guidelines, which I know California adopted in their legislation, and think about it of promoting this product has been either made with recycled material, so it can be recycled because it's followed those guidelines, versus, the labeling we're discussing where material cannot be recycled within the Oregon's statewide list. Does that help?
It does. Thank you, Nicole. Anya, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns there would be that just in my mind could be even more confusing to consumers to conflate PCR and like what the product is made out of and what the end of life for that product should be. Like those are pretty separable conversations. Well, yes, one influences the other. Just because you're made from recycled content does not make you recyclable, especially if we're thinking about Oregon and our list here. Like we will have a pretty explicit known content of what is recyclable in Oregon. And so just thinking about making sure that, you know, I think that was something that actually came up in one of those examples previously, the, gosh, was it the like toxins bin or something that was like had a 100% label on it and was
the
talking
sharps
about
container,
PCR,
yeah.
the sharps container, thank you. That was talking about PCR, but could have been misinterpreted as this is recyclable. And so those are pretty separable in my mind. And I want to make sure we stay clear and make sure that intention is clear.
Thank you, Anya. Athena, and then Kristen.
Thanks. Thanks for this, Anya. I guess my question as coming from the retailer perspective is about that final point around prohibiting the sale of, because I don't have clarity what the RMA and in Oregon, we actually, where the onus would live in terms of prohibiting the sale of something that is, you know, not following the standards that are set. So I guess just wondering from the group how that could potentially translate into the real world.
Yeah, that was an intention and a goal, and would love to think through enforcement and implementation there and making sure we are putting the onus where on the right person in the right place, and look to sharper legal minds than mine for thinking through that.
And speaking of sharper legal minds, I know that we do, hopefully we'll have DOJ presenting at a future meeting for us. So we will be able to ask some of those questions, Athena.
Thanks, Dylan. I think I was next, and I just wanted to ask a clarifying question of Jenny, because I must have misheard it. I thought you just said it was not difficult to put different labels for different states, for materials sold into different states. What did I miss something about that? Said that wasn't a hard thing for producers to do. So I'm sure I misunderstood you.
Yeah, I think you did. What I was trying to separate was it felt like we were having two parallel conversations around a label conversation versus a product design conversation. And a conversation around designing for recyclability is much more complicated than a conversation around having producers place labels that comply with state recyclability. We already do that with bottles, right? Like we have the little thing on there that tells you with 10 cents in this state, 5, whatever. But the label itself is something, it's still a challenge, right? But like, if we're designing a product that meets different recyclability standards in different states, that's a much more complicated question than just creating a product and then having to label whether you can recycle it in Oregon versus California. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I think,
Okay.
I guess what I was missing is before you were talking about the design for recyclability, which I do understand, but the point that now I'm understanding is that labeling for different states, at least from your perspective, while it is one more thing you do, it's something you're accustomed to doing and something that you do. So
Yeah, yes, exactly, yeah.
Thank you.
Before we go to Dave, I do want to clarify, DOJ will be presenting on consumer protection and not answering the questions that we're asking. So we'll have to set up something else if we wanted to ask that separate question. With that, we move to Dave, then Nicole, then we have our last presentation.
– Thank you. I think in the interest of time, I'll let Kristen's question and Jenny's answer stand. That mine was, there's enough overlap to my question. Let's just move on. And
Gotcha. Sounds good. Nicole?
Yes, and I have a quick question for Jenny, just to clarify actually what she was just talking about with Christian was, I understand the labeling piece. I'm wondering about the actual product itself. A lot of times the plastic products have the number on there with the recycling symbol also on it, that, you know, it's created at the mold. And so how would you feel about that? Because people are going to have that specific item, like at the bottom of a bottle that has a number, also not on the label, but imprinted on the actual plastic itself.
So again, we produce compostable products, not plastic. So I'm not actually that familiar with the plastic production process. But we do this to some degree with compostability labeling or marking. And like in certain states, like in Washington, for example, we produce brown compostable products because that's what Cedar Grove would like us to do. They're the composter up there. So the design part of it, when it comes to stamps, colors, etc., there is definitely variation. It adds complexity and it adds costs. And so I would imagine with a plastic product too, putting something on there that indicates the resin or recyclability would probably follow a similar process that is not really that far outside the scope of what happens for a lot of other reasons.
Okay, thank you. And then last, I believe I'm up, and it's less of a proposal, but rather some suggestions. I was responding to some of the other, I thought everyone had excellent presentations, and I'm grateful for those presentations. Really good conversation, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue that on. One of the ideas that I'm throwing out there, and again, this is the complete proposal, but rather bullets, would be a prohibition of the use of the chasing arrow symbol surrounding resin identification code or other symbol, or statement indicating that it's recyclable unless it's designated for collection under the PRO plan and approved by DEQ. I wanted to say as well that following the SB 343 compliance assessment, and this is speaking a bit to the comment that was made earlier, that you would offer an on-ramp for materials for non-Oregon but California accepted materials, an amendment of an RMA Pro plan implementation to address infrastructure and education needs. I want to be very clear that following my putting this out there, that DEQ has already told me previous to this that it would be very disruptive, at least for the first rulemaking, and there is an opportunity for the list to be adjusted following, be re-reviewed. So I would offer a friendly amendment to that, but the concept again would be putting the onus on the pro and allow for the availability of the investment in that. So if there was something that had close to on that percentage, that there would be some investment from the 582 process. So we are looking to that recycling system of the future, not what we're processing and sorting today. Another piece was consider mandating the RIC without triangle, only the number. So not too terribly different than what Kristen had approved, but I was trying to think in terms of implementation and the challenges that mold makers would have. It would be possible potentially to cover the triangle, but not the number, as opposed to adding something which would require a whole other mold to be able to do. Consider adjusting the timeline. Oh, sorry, this was the piece that DEQ gave me feedback on. Consider adjusting the timeline of the statewide list finalization in order to allow for more dialogue with CA. It is possible, but they said it would be very challenging. So instead to maybe consider having more dialogue with California while that list is being proposed. So I would offer a friendly amendment there. And then also I thought that I was trying to think of at the same time of the sortation system of the future, I was also trying to think of future of labeling considerations, and saying to allow or mandate embedded recyclability labeling, via QR code or other smart labeling technology. I know that one of the pieces of research that we're asking for is, some of those embedded in label technology that you could potentially point your phone at, or you could ask your phone if something is recyclable if you're geolocated or something along those lines, and that could potentially even be a compromise that you would both allow it or even mandate that. So that way it would be, again, something embedded in that way you would be able to have that information at the ready. And again, just thinking about this more for the future of these types of labeling as opposed to the labeling today, much as we're talking about the recycling system of the future. So these are sort of more grace notes or other additional considerations as opposed to a full proposal. And so with that, I will go to Kristen. Do you have a question, Kristen?
I just a comment on one of those things, that the QR code was one of the options we liked originally when we were contemplating this discussion. And I still think it's a worthy piece because it allows you to really truly be local about what your options are in your communities. And we've all seen systems such as Recollect currently where you can, look at an item and determine if it's available for recycling in your community. So I don't think it's that far out there. And in fact, there was even some testimony during Senate Bill 582 days on one of the labelers that talked about that possibility. So I like that piece. One of the issues we thought about when we were thinking about it was the equity part of that. How do you make sure that that's something that is usable for everybody in your community, not just, most of us, I suppose, have a smartphone, but you never know. And you always run into that piece of, oh my God, now I'm going to stand at my container on Sunday night and try and, run a camera on it and figure it out. But I think it's a really intriguing idea and I like it. I would say your second bullet point to me, when I read that, I think we have a system in the Senate Bill 582 already for that, which is the USCL process. We already are going to go through that piece and have those conversations about what's in or what's out, and it will probably, morph over time. So I think we do have that already in place for discussion in Oregon for what works in Oregon. So thanks.
Yeah, for sure. It was just giving that opportunity, trying to for that additional investment.
Yeah.
Thomas, go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan. I appreciate this. I'm wondering if you have a sense of what parts of this would require legislation. I think I see some of this possibly being addressed through rulemaking and kind of management of the PROs. And I think that would be a huge advantage for us in terms of actualizing some outcome of this project, because I think a new legislation regarding labeling would be a big lift in the legislature, especially we just got through 582. So I'm curious if you think most of these can be achieved without new legislation in Oregon.
Yes, I do believe that most of them could be achieved without that. It would just be a regulatory shift other than bullet number 3. So obviously that would be something different and would require a larger conversation. And yeah, so full stop. Athena, go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, I just sort of wanted to echo what Kristen said, but kind of on both points, the accessibility and equity part of using technology to help people understand what's recyclable. I think it is the future and it's something we should consider for all Oregonians. But I think that can be said also of just the resin identification codes, regardless of whether they have a triangle or the Mobius arrows or not. They're very hard to read. They're often small. So if we're really talking about accessibility, does the question of where on the label and how large that information should be, since the conversation is, it continues to come back to the RIC code.
Thank you for that. I would say to the former, one of the reasons I included this was some research I had read about the level of accessibility to smartphones. And it is extremely high in the 90 percentile range. And so that you could even argue that it is more equitable because it would be able to be adjustable for language if you were able to have that smart label. I want to say we are almost out of time because we did have people come in with questions. So if we could go through them quickly, Dan, Sean, and Nicole.
Yeah, Dylan, I love the bottom bullet, and you started to go to where I was going to go. Is it's access, equitable, diverse. I think it could feed into the diverse audience and consumers discussion when we get there. And I think to that particular one could probably in one place it's appropriate for is within echo modulation, which is part of the rulemaking. I think it's built in at least one natural place for something like this. So thanks.
Thank you, Sean.
Actually, I was just going to agree with what Dan just said, Dylan. I think, Thomas, and I think that last bullet on the QR code allowing for that option is a great idea and should be incorporated into any of the proposals.
Great. Thank you. Nicole?
I was just going to mention, yes, I was just at a meeting where Nestle talked about their QR codes that they have on their PET bottles. And if accessibility is an issue, I think rolling into what you were just talking about with the eco-modulating fees and the new PRO that we are looking at implementing in Oregon, we could have the retailers also have something they could scan at the stores for people that may not have smartphones. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so that was an excellent conversation. I'm sure unlocked a lot of questions from us all, and we'll have the opportunity as a task force to review these materials, the full materials, Kristen, not just our imperfect summary of your materials, as well as potentially have some new ideas as we break this into maybe pieces and put together as Legos. But before we do those Lego pieces and bring together, we do have 2 pieces of public input. I believe I know the name of, no, actually I have both. So I think we have Heather Trim on the line who wanted to offer some public comment from Zero Waste Washington. Heather? And if you're talking, you're not on audio just quite yet. So. All right, so we'll pause and Heather will give you a moment to be able to find your unmute button, and we'll go to our second public comment, which is Laura Liebrick. Laura, we have a few minutes for you if you want to unmute yourself, and then if Heather is able to, we'll be able to have her unmute as well and chime in. Laura, take us away.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you all for the work that you're doing. It's so good. I really just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification. There are some terms that have been used in the meeting, and I want to provide a little bit of insight into hauler speak. I've heard terms, commingled and curbside, segregated streams, things like that. We use those terms, we throw those terms around a lot in our industry, and I just want to make sure that there's a distinction made between them. So curbside versus depot collection, and some of you may know this, but others may not, that just refers to the place at which we are collecting material from the public. Commingled versus segregated stream, that would be mixed together material collected either in a depot or curbside, as Kristen Mitchell mentioned earlier. And segregated streams are often associated with things like glass, which can be collected on the side, curbside, in addition to commingled collection, curbside. And then there's the age-old confusion around source separated versus source segregated materials. We even get that one mixed up sometimes. Source separated materials are just recyclable materials that are separated from trash, essentially, at its most basic level. Source segregated materials are individual streams of material that are collected or dropped off. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. And if anyone has questions about any of those, please ask any of the haulers or processors in the room.
Laura, thank you so much for that incredibly helpful clarification, and I appreciate it better coming from you than me. So thank you for chiming in. Very, very helpful. And yes, we're in a very jargon-heavy industry, and a lot of us have worked together for so long that we forget about that. So thank you for raising the awareness and making this available and equitable for all on the task force, as well as the listeners. Heather, I see you have found your camera and off mute. So Heather, take us away.
Thank you, Dylan. Hi, everybody. Heather Trim with Zero Waste Washington in your neighboring state to the north. And I'm wondering why the heck you guys have not had any jokes or reference or anything to today, the 17th. What is that? Where's your green? I see some of you wearing green. Couple things. One, yes, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dan, for referencing the Washington bill, and we are very keen to be, we've discussed, as we were working on the EPR bill in Washington, we talked a lot about aligning with Oregon and Washington and California. So very glad to hear that you all are also looking at it from that sort of regional perspective. A couple of specific comments. One is one of the straw proposals did not just said start with plastics. I would definitely strongly disagree with that. If we're looking at multi-material, all different materials, we don't want to confuse the public by not doing the same thing for all materials. So I would strongly disagree with that. But the more, I guess, significant comment is, and I'm not sure that California did this, and maybe you all could do this and get the ball rolling, is the issue of items that are made of multi-materials. And maybe you could have specific call out in your recommendations about if something is made with something that is recyclable and something that is not recyclable, how it should be handled so that we have a more standardized way of doing that across the US. Completely agree with practically everyone on this Zoom that we need to have this at a federal or a higher level eventually.
Heather, thank you so much. Great questions. I guess that might be a question for Dan Brown, so come back to the next one. But my interpretation of 343 is that if there's language on the package that clearly states one part is recyclable and the other is not, that action that does adhere to the law, but that's a great call out to be able to dig into in the future. So excellent comments. Alex,
Suggestions you guys make a specific recommendation so that there would be consistency. That's my suggestion.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate that. Alex, do we have any other public comment, or do we capture everyone that was in queue?
That was everybody.
Terrific. So maybe we can go to the last slide. So, we are coming to a close. We're coming to the end. We wanted to highlight again. Just I don't think I put the slide of that street sign again. June 1, 2022, which is when the report needs to be finished. So this is what we currently have on the books. It would be the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks on April 4th. And currently we are going to do that for a 2-hour meeting. I did not hear robust availability to do extend beyond that. We do, I believe, have doodle polls out for the others. I would suggest that 2 of those we make 3 hours. So we actually are able to take the time to make sure that we're able to make these considerations. It seems like there's a lot of good conversation, but it's going to be very hard to then make decisions with this whole conversation. So I want to be very clear and make sure that we have the time together to be able to get to those pieces. So we have the week of the 18th, the 2nd, May 2nd, and May 16th. And then our final meeting, which I would suggest would be used as just a review of the edited document, would be that final week, the week of May 25th. With a couple of minutes, I just want to see if there's any questions or comments about that timeline. And, again, just make sure that we all are digesting this and understanding it. Go ahead. Senator Beyer?
The chair.
Yes.
So the doodle poll does keep 2-hour time blocks for the next meetings. If folks want to, I can redo that doodle poll, or we can just assume that all of the meetings will be 3 hours. And if you want to go back in with that link and look at them, add an hour onto the backside of it, perhaps.
On the end, I guess, Alex, how many responses do we have to the doodle polls? Maybe that can answer that.
Almost everyone at this point.
Gotcha. Okay. So, so adding it to the top or the bottom of it. So making it an hour later or an hour before.
I would say an hour later. Because some of them are morning meetings.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we'll have to do that via email to that. Are there any other questions or comments about the timing of those meetings, or again, the deadlines? And Senator Beyer, I didn't know if you had something you wanted to say. No, okay. Oh, go ahead, Kristen. Thank you.
I don't have a comment on the timelines. I'm fine with however you set up the meetings, but I do have a question about whether it would be possible at one of these meetings to have someone come speak to us from FTC Green Guides. I'd love to hear what's happening with the FTC. I know they're under discussions for making changes to that. I find it to be one of the least transparent processes I've ever tried to look at. So I'd love to have somebody come from the FTC and tell me what I'm missing. So that would be great. And maybe we could get the bonus of maybe Steve Alexander from APR at the same time to speak, because I know he's been having conversations as well, or working on or having those discussions about green guides and has some ideas about that. So I just would like to toss that out there for a future agenda. And I know time is tight, but I think it would be helpful to this group. We've talked enough about FTC green guides, federal issues, that it would be nice to see the intersection. Thanks.
Perfect. We can reach out to both of those, and I can work with Alex. We have contacts at both FTC Green Guides as well as with Steve Alexander. Dan, and then
if you can get them to come, that'd be fantastic. I'll tell you, they're being pretty tight-lipped. Others have made requests, and they're just saying they're not allowed right now to come out and speak. That being said, there are some other options. You know, Dylan, if you hit a roadblock there's some other options with some law firms. Maybe we'll do a pro bono to come on and talk about what they know. So,
thank you, Dan. And Senator Byer.
Yeah, just a comment. I really good information today. I'm probably the least informed of the group here listening, so I spent a lot of time listening. But the one thing that I hope we don't lose is I really like the idea of using the QR code from the perspective is that as we move forward, it seems like that would be an easy way. It takes a lot of consumer education, but it'd be an easy way to recognize differences among the states. And as the pros get underway and move forward, changes that would happen there, it seems like it'd be a good way to inform people the most, consumers the most. So just a thought.
Terrific. Oh, gosh. All right. Well, we are trying to close up. We are at time. So William, very quickly, and Maya.
Very simple. Restaurants have forced us into the QR code for a while now. I just got back from Orlando and you couldn't get a paper menu, didn't seem like. So I think we've been forced into it. And I think as I wrap my head around it, it's a better idea. And I like the ability to multilingual, I don't know what word I'm using, it. So thank you.
Maya?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that too, that differently abled people, not just from different languages, but potentially the blind as well would benefit from something like this. So I do think that it is on the horizon, and we might as well embrace it.
Well, that's terrific. We will pick that up where we left off. Next meeting, we are going to have questions. We want to be able to bring your Lego pieces as we break this up, as well as potentially new ideas, because I'm sure your imaginations are all unlocked and thinking about what the future of the recommendations we could have. So, and we'll reach out to FTC as well as Steve Alexander to potentially have presentations in the future. And look to communications from us in the coming days as of Vice Chair Brandon and I, as well as the wonderful support and leadership from DEQ staff, invaluable to be able to drive this forward. Thank you to DEQ. Thank you to all of my fellow task force members and Vice Chair Brandon. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Oh, and the public comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.